Good morning, everybody. I call this hearing to order. I request unanimous consent that the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Hearing no objections, so ordered. I also request unanimous consent that we waive on to the committee Representatives Sherfulis McCormick, Porter, and O'Halloran to join this hearing, where they may ask questions to our witnesses. They've all worked hard on legislation on the agenda today. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Today, our subcommittee is meeting both in person and remotely for the first time in several months. I want to be clear about what makes this format possible. First, the wide availability of vaccines and boosters throughout the United States and specifically to the members and staff of this committee. Second, the regular and continued adherence to recommended health and safety protocols. This pandemic is by no means over, but we have reached a point where we can safely engage in person if certain practices are followed. This information previously was provided to members and staff, but I want to reiterate what the committee will require in order for members and staff to participate in this hearing in person. One, if you're unvaccinated or your vaccination status is undetermined, you must wear a mask at all times. Two, if you're unvaccinated or your vaccination status is undetermined, you must maintain physical distance within the hearing room. Three, if you are feeling unwell, you should participate in the hearing remotely. And four, members are permitted to be accompanied by one staff member while they're present in the hearing room. During the covered period declared by the Speaker pursuant to House Resolution 8, remote participation in hearings will continue to be an option for members. Additionally, after today's proceeding, we'll assess whether continuing to meet in person is advisable and feasible. For those members participating remotely, if you're experiencing connectivity issues, please make sure you or your staff contact our designated technical support so those issues can be resolved immediately. Members participating remotely must continue to remain visible on camera for the duration of their participation in the hearing, unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render the member unable to fully participate on camera. It is committee policy that members participating remotely will remain muted when not recognized, and for those in the hearing room, the policy remains the same, that only members who are recognized or seeking recognition should unmute their microphone. This is out of courtesy to all members on the committee, and so that background noise does not interfere with another member who is recognized to speak. When you're recognized, whether in the hearing room or on the remote platform, you'll need to unmute your microphone and pause for 2 to 3 seconds before speaking so that your words are captured on the live stream. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of committee seniority for questioning witnesses today. This will make it easier for me to ensure all members participating have an opportunity to be recognized. With that bit of housekeeping out of the way, I now recognize myself for my opening statement. I want to welcome everyone to today's Economic Opportunity Subcommittee hearing, where we're reviewing 12 pieces of legislation. Today, our subcommittee will again consider bills and drafts that span our jurisdiction, and I thank the ranking member, our staff, and our VSO partners for their work. We have 2 proposals related to veteran homelessness. We'll be looking at Congresswoman Sherfulis McCormick's discussion draft to make permanent some of the flexibilities put into place for homeless veterans in my legislation, the Johnny Isakson and David P. Rowe Veterans Health Care and Benefits Improvement Act of 2020. First, I'd like to welcome Congresswoman Sherfulis McCormick to the House Veterans Affairs Committee. I'm especially glad to have her joining us on the Economic Opportunity Subcommittee and appreciating her jumping in with this important legislation to permanently authorize VA to provide homeless veterans with basic needs that they need for their survival, safety, and health. Her bill is a long-needed change in policy that will allow VA to expend funds for essentials like food, shelter, clothing, transportation, and communication devices for homeless veterans. Permanently authorizing these flexibilities will help provide homeless veterans the wraparound services needed to get them and to keep them stably housed. We'll also consider a discussion draft from Congressman O'Halloran that aims to increase HUD-VASH voucher utilization and get more veterans experiencing or at risk of homelessness into permanent housing by expanding eligibility for the program. We also have a proposal related to oversight of the VA Home Loan Guarantee Program. We'll look at Congresswoman Porter's draft legislation that requires VA to publish home loan data publicly on a quarterly basis and to report to Congress each year on consumer protection efforts related to the program. This legislation was drafted in response to Congresswoman Porter's research that revealed how predatory mortgage lenders are still exploiting veteran borrowers despite years of efforts to prevent such abuses. This subcommittee looks forward to working with her to further strengthen protections for veterans using their VA home loan benefit. As usual, we have a number of proposals related to veteran education and training benefits. We'll look at my draft legislation, which expands eligibility for self-employment assistance under the Veteran Readiness and Employment, or VR&E, program. My bill aims to increase participation in the VRNE self-employment track, which helps veterans start up their own businesses. This is currently the least utilized track, accounting for approximately 1/5 of 1% of all VRNE applicants, in part due to restrictive eligibility criteria. We also have a proposal from Congresswoman Sherrill that directs VA to update their payment system for foreign educational institutions where veterans are using their GI Bill benefits. Additionally, we'll consider a discussion draft that further strengthens student veteran protections by establishing additional criteria that educational institutions and courses of study must meet in order to be approved for the GI Bill. At the end of last year, President Biden signed Congressman Trone's bill, the Responsible Education Mitigating Option and Technical Extensions, or REMOTE Act. This bill ensured that during the spring 2022 term, student veterans would still have the flexibilities they need to pursue their education despite challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, we're considering my draft bill that would automatically kick in these protections whenever the President and Secretary of Veterans Affairs declare an emergency situation. With this legislation, student veterans will not have to worry about whether they'll be able to pay for their housing should they need to shift to remote studies, or if they'll be able to retain their benefits should they need to suspend their education due to the emergency. We'll also consider H.R. 6458, which is co-led by Representatives Murphy, Trone, and Axney. This bill eliminates the requirement to specify an effective period of transfer of educational assistance to a dependent. Practically, this means that if a service member accidentally makes a mistake on their paperwork and passes away before their educational assistance benefits are used, their dependent will not be prevented from receiving educational assistance. Additionally, we'll hear testimony regarding the Quality Education for Veterans Act of 2022 and Congressman Buchanan's H.R. 6604, the Veterans Eligible to Transfer Schools Credit Act. We also have a proposal that makes improvements to the Transition Assistance Program, or TAP. My staff worked closely with Chairwoman Brownlee to craft this legislation in response to testimony and concerns we heard from VSOs at our hearings last year related to TAP. This bill would address the difficulties that women and minority service members face during their transition from military to civilian life by requiring VA to provide tailored benefits counseling. It also ensures that counselors screen service members for additional factors like their need for child care, their location, or the effects of their operating tempo that may impact their individual unique needs during transition. Finally, we'll discuss Congressman Fitzgerald's bill that ensures that service members who are granted a general discharge under honorable conditions solely for refusing the COVID-19 vaccine are eligible for VA educational assistance programs. We have a lot to cover today, so I'll conclude my comments and recognize my friend, Ranking Member Moore, for any opening comments he may wish to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for continuing the bipartisan tradition of this subcommittee by including 4 Republican proposals out of 12 total bills being considered during today's legislative hearings. While I am generally supportive of the bills being considered today, pending scoring and offsets, I do have concerns about potential unintended consequences that several of these bills present. First, I would like to thank Chairman Levin for including my bill, H.R. 7074, the Equality of Education for Veterans Act of 2022, on the agenda for today. We all know that the GI Bill has been one of the most transformative benefits that our country continues to provide to veterans, service members, their dependents, and survivors. Currently, law authorizes beneficiaries to attend education or training at thousands of authorized providers. While 99% of these schools and training establishments provide students with the tools they need to succeed in the 21st century economy, there are some that simply do not meet the mark. We have seen reports of schools, all different types, misrepresenting and in some cases defrauding students and taxpayers of millions of dollars in the process. Congress has done a good job in the past few years instituting measures to catch and punish bad schools. But we must do more to catch the bad actors before the program is approved by the GI Bill benefits. I was pleased to work with the investigative staff of the VA and the Office of the Inspector General to craft this piece of legislation. This bill would provide that the OIG with the additional tools they and the state approving agencies need to protect students and taxpayers alike. I want to thank the OIG staff for being here today to testify on the bill and for their assistance in crafting it. I know the chairman has a draft approval bill on the agenda as well, and unfortunately I believe this draft would make it harder for good programs to be approved, which would then unnecessarily limit veterans' choice at many HBCUs, community colleges, and small nonprofits. While they are not testifying today, I was deeply concerned by the Veterans and Foreign Affairs of the United States statement for the record, which stated, "The consequences of these proposed changes are not thoroughly thought out and will have major negative impact on student veterans." I look forward to working with the chairman on crafting a bipartisan solution. The other bill I would like to flag for potential unintended consequences is the draft bill that would authorize the VA to not provide wraparound case management services for homeless veterans through the HUD VASH voucher program. I know the goal of this proposal is to hopefully streamline the process so VA can get veterans into permanent housing more quickly. That is a goal that I wholeheartedly support, but allowing the VA to abdicate their responsibility to provide case management because they refuse to hire more counselors or use existing contract authority may not be the right solution. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses today about these two issues, and I know we can work together to address my concerns. I also want to mention I'm supportive of other GOP bills being considered today, which include Mr. Buchanan's bill that will make it easier for veterans to use the GI Bill benefits that were restored after the school closed in the middle of a semester, Dr. Murphy's bill that would help streamline the administration of transferred GI Bill benefits to dependents, and Mr. Fitzgerald's bill that would ensure that those service members who are discharged with general discharges under honorable conditions due to their decision to not take the COVID vaccine are not denied the education benefits that they have rightly earned. I know that there continues to be disagreements about the need for vaccine mandates in this country. However, I hope that we can work at this issue today and look at it with a new lens and how it impacts our service members in the future. We continue to see hundreds of service members who have and will continue to be discharged due to their personal health decision. I personally believe we should not punish them by denying them their hard-earned VA education benefits. Before closing, I want to extend my condolences to Mr. Learman and the entire DAV family on the death of former Executive Director Gary Augustine. While I never had the opportunity to work with Gary, I have heard about his years of service at the DAV and strong advocacy for veterans. His family will be in my prayers. Finally, I want to thank our witnesses who are here to testify. I look forward to hearing how we can improve upon the legislation before us today. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back.
I thank the ranking member and look forward to continuing to work together in a bipartisan way on all these issues. And we've got a great panel today. For our first panel, we'll hear from the Department of Veterans Affairs. First, we have Brianne Ogilvie, Assistant Deputy Undersecretary for Policy and Oversight for the Veterans Benefits Administration. Hello there. I see you on our screen. Ms. Ogilvie is accompanied by Ricardo Da Silva, Program Integration Officer for the Education Service and the Veterans Benefits Administration. Nice to see you again, Mr. Da Silva. Ms. Ogilvie is also accompanied by Monica Diaz, Executive Director of the Homeless Programs Office for the Veterans Health Administration. Welcome back, Ms. Diaz. Thank you all for joining the subcommittee today. And with that, I'll now recognize Ms. Ogilvie for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Moore, and members of the subcommittee. We appreciate the opportunity to appear before you to discuss pending legislation. Accompanying me today are Ricardo Da Silva, Program Integration Officer for Veterans Benefits Administration's Education Service, and Monica Diaz, Executive Director from Veterans Health Administration's Homeless Programs Office. Before talking about the legislation before us today, I want to take a moment to discuss VA's many accomplishments in supporting veterans in fiscal year 2021. VA has appreciated Congress's support to enable VA to take rapid action to empower veterans to succeed even in difficult times. VA paid out more than $11 billion in education benefits to over 841,000 veterans and their beneficiaries, enabling them to continue their pursuits of higher education, professional certifications, and trade skills. VA's Veteran Readiness and Employment Program boasted over 125,000 participants with 17,000 positive outcomes and 32,000 newly developed plans, helping eligible service members and veterans prepare for, find, and maintain suitable jobs through counseling and case management. VA's loan guarantee saw record-breaking performance with over 1.44 million loans guaranteed, valued at over $447 billion. This included over 444,000 purchase loans, an all-time program high. Additionally, VA worked tirelessly with industry partners to assist veterans in financial hardship, helping over 98% of veterans in default retain their homes or avoid foreclosure. I mention these successes to demonstrate the outstanding work VA employees do each day to serve veterans and their families. But secondly, and most importantly, it speaks to the exemplary relationship we have with this committee and the continuous dialogue we maintain to build effective legislation, such as those before us today, that supports, enables, and empowers veterans across the country. VA offers support for many items before us today. While VA's views on all bills are detailed in my written testimony to include areas of concern and support, I would like to highlight a few areas related to the proposed legislation. VA supports H.R. 6458, which would eliminate the need for a service member to decide the timeframe for a dependent to use transferred entitlement and prevent the negative impact of certain decisions. This provides service members and their families with more flexibility regarding their GI Bill benefits. VA continues this line of support regarding the bill to create permanent authority for educational assistance benefits during emergency situations. This would consolidate and simplify authorities, enabling VA to act swiftly in times of emergency to protect veterans' education benefits. Notably, we look forward to further discussion on sections 4 and 7, where written testimony offers suggested amendments to improve the execution of this proposed legislation. VA support also extends to the bills for requirements for approval and disapproval of education courses, expansion of eligibility for VR&E self-employment assistance, and Quality Education for Veterans Act of 2022. In each of these bills, VA has technical comments regarding certain sections and would be happy to follow up at the request of the subcommittee. VA does not support the bill for electronic fund transfer to foreign institutions only because it would cause significant disruption to the digital GI Bill modernization effort. VA recognizes the importance of this issue and has been working with the Department of Treasury on a solution that would enable international direct deposit payments to both foreign educational facilities and foreign-based student veterans. Lastly, VA strongly supports both veteran homelessness bills under consideration today. One would permanently authorize the vital temporary authorities granted in Section 4201 of Isaacson Roe, and the other would provide much-needed flexibility that will significantly increase the number of veterans we can serve in the HUD-VASH program. On each proposed legislation before us today, VA is committed to working together toward our common goal of continuous improvement in service to veterans and other beneficiaries. We are grateful for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss this proposed legislation. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony. My colleagues and I are prepared to respond to any questions you or other members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ogilvie. With that, I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes, begin the question portion of the hearing. Appreciate you joining us, and I'd like to start with my draft bill to expand eligibility for the VR&E self-employment track. Could you discuss some of the benefits that a veteran in the self-employment track receives?
Yes. So veterans under the self-employment track, they receive, it allows for the payment and license fees and the provision of equipment and supplies for veterans. Now, in the current legislation, not the proposed legislation, under the current law, the payment of license fees and the provision of equipment and supplies is only provided to the most severely disabled veterans. So those who require homebound training or self-employment or both. This bill would allow for this payment of license fees and the provision of equipment and supplies for all veterans who qualify for benefits under Chapter 31. And this is why we support this bill. We feel like it'll improve participation in the self-employment, and it'll provide veterans with the opportunity to have VA fund the license fees and the provision of equipment and supplies.
Thank you for that, Ms. Ogilvie. Last July, you're probably aware, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Moore, and I wrote a letter to VA asking several questions about the VR&E program and this track in particular. VA noted in its response that it's unable to estimate costs for each track. However, in today's testimony, VA states that the bill will require additional appropriations. And we understand VA is still assessing the costs associated with this bill, but can you explain where any cost increase would stem from?
So VA does not anticipate any discretionary costs, but we do anticipate some mandatory costs. The costs would likely come from if the participation increases, then VA would be funding the payment of the license fees and the provision of equipment and supplies, and that would come out of mandatory costs.
All right, thank you for that. Mr. De Silva, I'd like to turn to you. Wasn't that long ago we were working with your office on the Remote Act. That was our bill that extended flexibilities for educational assistance during the pandemic through this spring term. And while we introduced the bill in October and hoped to pass it quickly, it unfortunately got stuck in a legislative logjam until right before the flexibilities were set to expire in December. Do you have any anecdotes you can share as to the strain student veterans were under at the end of last semester when the extension of the COVID flexibilities were uncertain?
Thank you for the question. As you said in it, we went up to the last day there. I think the president signed the bill on December 21st, the day that those authorities were due to expire. And so certainly here at the VA at Education Service, in the run-up to that extension, we were certainly fielding quite a few questions from not only our students, but also schools sort of on the uncertainty of what was going to happen in the future. So the legislation, the proposed legislation today is one that we support since it gives us that flexibility and those authorities that would prevent those uncertainties in the future and provide a bit more security to our veterans, but also our school partners in their ability to deliver education benefits.
Thank you for that. So I appreciate that you're in support. Could you maybe elaborate more how the bill stands to serve student veterans in the unfortunate event that another emergency situation arises while they're pursuing their education?
Certainly. Thank you for the question. In particular, one of the pieces we've learned here during COVID was that quick transition, or the transition that schools took to go from an in-resident operating model to online. And so this bill would allow VA to continue to pay that in-resident rate in circumstances where the school has had to convert to an online modality because of an emergency situation. So that certainly is one of the bigger ones, but then also in the event that a school has to close or a program has to be disapproved due to the emergency situation, we have the authority under this legislation to pay for up to 4 weeks of housing to that student with no charge against their entitlement.
Appreciate that, Mr. Silva, and I thank you all, as always, for the work you're doing for our veterans. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ranking Member Moore for his questions.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Ogilvie, I have been told that if the instructional spending limits in the draft approval bill were enacted, that thousands of programs across the country, including many well-known institutions, HBCUs, community colleges, could be cut off from GI Bill funds. Do you agree?
Thank you for that question. So there's some parts, VA has some concerns with this bill. With some of the approval requirements in the bill, VA would need access to an institution's financial records to be able to monitor compliance. Some of the approval and disapproval requirements are, as I mentioned, VA has some concerns with those, and we would like to work with the subcommittee staff on some technical changes to some of these. One of the other concerns of ours, which could impact some of these schools, is that VA would recommend a comprehensive list of the adverse actions or definitions of adverse actions or punitive actions that are required for disapproval. So one of them specifically that concerns us is that the specific adverse action of a loss of accreditation, or specifically actually the risk of loss of accreditation, could have a dramatic and sudden impact on enrolled students. And it could cause certain students to stop programs or transfer schools, even though there's no negative action that is actually taken regarding accreditation. So those are some of our concerns with this bill.
Okay, thank you. And also, Ms. Ogilvie, this is a sort of a follow-up in some of my comments. I noticed the department failed to provide their views on H.R. 6671, a bill that would ensure that those who have been discharged with a general discharge due to their choice not to receive the COVID-19 vaccine are still eligible for GI Bill. When can the subcommittee expect the VA to submit views on this legislation?
Yes, thank you for that question. So as you know, this bill would provide that a general discharge under honorable conditions issued on the basis that an individual failed to obey the lawful order to receive a COVID-19 vaccine will be a qualifying discharge for purposes of post 9/11 GI Bill benefits. So unfortunately, we were unable to provide views in advance of this hearing, but we are currently assessing this bill and will offer views and technical assistance in the weeks or months ahead.
Any idea when? I tell you, in my district, I've got Fort Rucker and Maxwell Gunner, and I am getting a lot of calls, a lot of concerns. I'm attending meetings on Monday night, and one meeting nearly 400 people, and so that's a huge issue for our military, for the veterans going forward, obviously, in the discharge. So when do you think we might could hear something?
Yes, sir. Thanks for that. I definitely will emphasize the urgency of this, and we will make sure to get back to you in the next few weeks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back a minute and a half.
Thank my friend, the ranking member, and I'll turn to my friend, the gentleman from Maryland, Representative Trone, for his questions.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you again, Chairman Levin, for holding this hearing. We've made great strides toward eliminating veteran homelessness, but we still have a ways to go. We need every single vet that's homeless or unstably housed into stable housing. So I'd like to talk today a little bit about the discussion draft that will be introduced by Chairman Levin and Congressman O'Halloran. The legislation will give HUD-VASH flexibility, additional flexibility, prevent veterans that are unstably housed from becoming homeless. So, Ms. Diaz, it'd be great if you could share with us a little more about HUD-VASH voucher utilization and talk about your thoughts on why the vouchers are underutilized and what this program is going to do if we make these suggested changes.
Hi, thank you for that question. Looking at the proposed bill, we certainly favor the bill, and we do think that it provides great benefits, not only to the service of the veterans within the HUD-VASH program, but it could have a very good impact when it comes to the voucher utilization as well. The bill has two sections that we know. The first section that covers the staffing clarifications for need, and that in itself is a benefit for the program, which currently any veteran that qualifies or enters to the program has to require case management. The bill allows the choice in terms of if the veteran needs case management, then they need to be provided with that, and we certainly are committed to that. That allows as well an immediate movement more quickly when it comes to the voucher utilization, because the case management does not need to necessarily be assigned in certain instances. The other part of the bill, which is Section 2, it does provide as well an expansion of eligibility, and within that, certain verbiage and terminologies is added, which includes the formerly homeless veterans and at risk of homelessness. That in itself as well would increase accessibility and flexibility for other veterans to be able to participate in the program, and therefore at the same time impact voucher utilization. An example will be a veteran that is receiving a non-HUD-VASH subsidy. Currently, those veterans cannot be transferred to a program to receive the comprehensive integration support that they could get from the VA health system in conjunction with the program, because they're not technically homeless when they are not when they're in that non-HUD-VASH subsidy. This bill provides the flexibility to change that. So we certainly foresee that there are only positive outcomes with the moving forward with the bill in many areas that is reflected here. Thank you.
I'll tell you, that's what I really like about this discussion draft. As a business person, all my life, we're trying to get ahead, anticipate what's going to happen. And the two groups of veterans that are most likely to end up homelessness are those that are formerly homeless, can slip back in, and those that are at high risk. And when you judge they're heading that way and you see it coming, why, it makes no sense to wait until the worst thing has happened. And the worst thing is they're homeless. Now we try and fix it. So I think this seems like really smart policy to go upstream and anticipate what's likely to happen, take those remedial efforts at that time, and try and save us from reaching the bottom of the bottom when that vet becomes homeless, and we can try and put a stop to this outrage that we have vets, on our streets that don't have a home. Does that pretty much sum up where we are on this, Ms. Diaz?
Yes, sir. I think we concur certainly in the benefit and in having the flexibility to amplify it in those areas that you mentioned. So again, we VA support this bill wholeheartedly, let's just say.
That's great. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. It's crucial we reach our vets before they're homeless. So I want to thank Chair Levin and Member O'Halloran for their leadership on this issue. Yield back.
Thank my friend Representative Trone, and now I'm excited to welcome our new member from the great state of Florida, Representative Cheerfulest McCormick. Welcome to the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and specifically welcome to the Economic Opportunity Subcommittee. Good to have you here, and the floor is yours for questions.
Good morning, and thank you so much for allowing me to be here today. Homelessness and our veterans are such an imperative part of our job and responsibility in taking care of the people who service us the most and risk their lives. And one of the questions I wanted to ask was, are there any statistics about where we see the rising number of the most homeless veterans? And also, are there any statistics about, has that population been decreasing or increasing in certain areas?
Thank you for the question. We utilize nationally mainly different sorts of data, but the more recognized in terms of looking at the numbers, we look at the PIT count results and determine that there is, a trend that most of us are aware, and looking at the communities at the West Coast hold the majority of the homeless veteran population in numbers. Now, the last PIT count number does not give us the total number for the unsheltered population as well. So we will need to assess that as we move forward. We as well relied as well on the income data that we have on our VA system in terms of where we see more the inflow of the veterans as well in our program. But I will say that in generic terms, the West Coast holds a significant amount of that population. And then I certainly can take for the record if you want the detailed numbers of those, and we are happy to provide that.
Thank you. And are there any kind of interventions that can help prevent homelessness that you're aware of?
Yes, there are many, and it comes from from the inflow side, right, from the preventive side as well. When we're close to getting the veteran into the system, we provide many of those interventions that include preventive measures and supported services. It includes outreach efforts as well that we do. It includes as well making sure that we have availability for offering transitional beds across the country and rapid rehousing for the veterans when needed. So the homeless programs within VA does provide a comprehensive portfolio for all the different type of perhaps needs that we need to address on the prevention side, but at the same time rapidly address homelessness when the veteran in itself is already homeless.
And are there any tangible physical items that we could provide that would help alleviate any stressors aside from direct payments that you're aware of?
Yeah, I think in terms of the big bills that we have here today, giving us the permanent authority, right, and this making clear the statutory authority through the bills in some of this in terms of flexibility is extremely helpful. I will say moving forward with those makes it clear in terms of the provision of services and the flexibilities that we can utilize in the program, which is so critical. Each veteran has their own needs, right, and if we are able to take the barriers out and the walls out and allow the clinical team to have those flexibilities so that individualized and holistic care for the veteran, I think that is one of the critical help. Besides obviously what you mentioned, the funding that we have, but this bill does provide a lot of that. So that's why we strongly support them.
Thank you so much. I'm happy we were able to focus on the need to make sure that the funding is flexible, so we can make sure that everybody's needs are being met based on their circumstances and allowing them to have the treatment that's good for them particularly and specifically. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, because we see that this bill here helps our veterans actually start preventing their homelessness and help them actually transition out of homelessness and really meets their need. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I leave back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Sherfless McCormick. Hearing no further members or seeing no further members, we can turn to the second panel. I think at least a few of our panelists are here in person, so perhaps we'll take a minute and get everyone set up. All right, greetings, everybody. It's great to see you all. Welcome back to our hearing room. It's my pleasure to welcome our second panel, consisting of representatives from veteran service organizations. 4 are joining us in person today, and 1 is on Zoom. First, we have David Case, Deputy Inspector General for the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General. Thanks for joining us. After that, we have Steve Berg, Vice President for Programs and Policy at the National Alliance to End Homelessness. Thank you for being here. Next, we have Justin Hoschild, Policy Counsel for the Student Veterans of America. Nice to see you. And after that is Shane Learman, Deputy National Legislative Director for Disabled American Veterans. Good to see you this morning. Finally, we have a new face before this committee, Diedrich Asante Mohammed, Chief of Membership, Policy, and Equity for the National Community Reinvestment Coalition. Nice to see you this morning, and welcome. We also have written statements from the Veterans of Foreign Wars, Veterans Education Success, Mazone, A Jewish Response to Hunger, Bento, and the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans, which will be entered into the record. With that, I'll now recognize Mr. Case for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and subcommittee members, thank you for providing the VA Office of Inspector General the opportunity to discuss the Quality Education for Veterans Act of 2022. This bill would strengthen the OIG's efforts to prevent and detect fraud in VA's education and job training programs. My statement draws on our recent oversight of these programs, including extensive education fraud investigations. In the past 5 years, our Office of Investigations has worked over 200 cases involving educational institutions accused of misconduct, with a loss to the government of over $150 million. Their crimes and other wrongdoing have included not providing educational services for which they were paid, making false statements to the government, and noncompliance with VA regulations meant to protect students and the department from fraud, waste, and poor quality services. These cases often concern owners and operators of non-accredited educational institutions providing false documentation or making misleading claims to VA and SAAs. Fraudulent documents and actions resulted in these institutions being approved and accepting veterans' earned benefits, all while providing inadequate and, in some cases, no training or education at all. Our education-focused oversight has identified systemic issues and administrative gaps that allow bad actors to be approved and go on to commit fraud. The draft bill would help close these gaps by creating a uniform SAA application with consistent documentation requirements for all schools applying to the GI Bill program, enabling SAAs to perform more effective compliance checks and ensure the quality and stability of applicants, and encouraging compliance and risk-based surveys to occur with limited notice, which reduces opportunities for institutions to hide fraudulent activity. To the first and second points, SAA applications in some states do not require schools to disclose certain key information, such as an attestation of compliance with applicable laws and regulations, their articles of incorporation and proof of licensing, and a financial statement prepared by an appropriate third party. A uniform application with these key disclosures will help ensure all schools meet consistent quality standards and hold non-compliant schools accountable. The importance of these requirements can be illustrated by an OIG case involving a school named Retail Ready. The school's owner lied to the SAA, stating that the school had been operating for 2 years when it had only existed for a few months and had never trained any students. The owner also submitted fraudulent, self-prepared financial statements to support the application. The money meant for educating veterans was used by the owner for luxury vehicles and real estate worth more than $2.5 million. Students were promised training for well-paid careers in the heating and air conditioning industry, but found themselves without the basic skills needed for entry-level technicians. Requiring Retail Ready to submit the bill's disclosures could have helped impede this fraud scheme and may have spared VA the loss of over $71 million and many veterans the significant loss of their benefits, time, and opportunities. There is also clear value in the bill's provision requiring SAAs to check with the Department of Education for any adverse actions against the applying institution. This provision leverages federal resources to identify potential fraudsters. Third, current law does not dictate how much notice schools receive before risk-based and compliance surveys. These surveys involve examining an institution's books and records and possible interviews with school personnel and veterans. Our investigations found that some schools use this time between the notice and the date of the inspection to manipulate and falsify records and to coach or prepare students for potential questioning by VA or SAA staff. Shortening the notice period reduces the opportunity for schools to commit fraud and cover their tracks. In conclusion, students should not have to worry about losing their education benefits to fraudulent or low-quality programs. The Quality Education for Veterans Act would make improvements that will help protect both VA and GI Bill beneficiaries. Chairman Levin, I would be happy to answer any questions you or other members of the subcommittee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Case. I now recognize Mr. Berg for 5 minutes.
There we go. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moore, Mr. Levin, for having me here today. I'm with the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and we are very happy to talk about the work that's been done on veterans homelessness over the years, where we are right now, and some of the legislation here. Beginning, frankly, in the George W. Bush administration, the federal government has begun a strong effort to end homelessness among veterans. Both the people here on the Hill, people in the administration, and a couple of different administrations carrying on to the Obama administration and onward. This has been effective work. The number of veterans who are homeless on any given time has dropped by tens of thousands. The VA has established a very strong set of programs that provide a range of different resources to different veterans who have different needs, to meet each veteran where they are, meet each homeless veteran where they are, and to keep them safe while they're homeless, and more importantly, to end their homelessness quickly. That being said, we're not done yet. I mean, during the 5-year period between 2011 and 2016, the number of veterans who were homeless each night went down by 5,000 a year. Since 2016 to 2020, during those 4 years, the number of veterans who were homeless each night went down by 500 a year. So we're not done yet. There's still tens of thousands of veterans who are homeless every night, and we need to make sure that the programs we have are at scale and that they are and that they have the precision needed to actually address the problems. So a couple of the bills on today. One, I agree, making permanent the special COVID authorities, the bill that several people that Chairman Levin talked about. This is a very important bill. The kinds of services that can be paid for under that authority are often things that are hard to get other sources of money for. It's very important that that continue. There's detail about this in my written testimony. On the HUD-VASH issue that Mr. Moore mentioned and the VA witnesses mentioned also, we are big supporters of the HUD-VASH program. We feel it has a very, not just we feel, the data on it, the research on the permanent supportive housing model that HUD-VASH funds shows very clearly that the cost effectiveness comes from targeting that program at veterans who have the most severe need, who have been homeless the longest, who are homeless now, who have been homeless the longest, who have severe disabilities, often behavioral health problems, mental illness, substance addiction. HUD-VASH is designed to deal with those very difficult cases, and in order to make progress on homelessness, data has shown over and over that concentrating on those very difficult cases is extremely important. HUD-VASH is the program that does that. There are other programs at VA that deal with veterans whose needs aren't so severe. We're very supportive of those programs. They all need to be brought to scale. The whole system, all the different programs need more scale. They need more money. I hate to say it, but I end up talking about money a lot, which is unfortunate, but it's the case. So we're happy. We at the National Alliance to End Homelessness are very happy to continue to work with VA and work with the staff here and the other applicable committees to come up with a bill on HUD-VASH that will deal with I don't want to even call it a problem. There are some communities where all the veterans who the program was really designed for, none of them are homeless anymore. They've all been housed. It's been an overwhelming success. But that doesn't mean there's still not a need for this kind of intensive program. I'd also like to refer to my written testimony on a couple of other issues that aren't in legislation, but just the importance of the housing subsidy initiative that VA's got going now, that continue. And just the whole approach that's come under the name of Housing First, I think has been part of the VA's work since the Bush administration. It's very important that we keep that. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks and for your written testimony and your work. Now turn to Mr. Hochschild.
Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting Student Veterans of America to submit our testimony on pending legislation. SVA has a mission focused on empowering student veterans, and we are committed to providing an educational experience that goes beyond the classroom. Through a dedicated network of chapters on campuses across the country, SVA aims to inspire yesterday's warriors by connecting student veterans with a community of like-minded chapter leaders. We appreciate the opportunity to share our views on the legislation before you today, which will directly impact student veterans, service members, their families, and survivors. We encourage the subcommittee to review our written testimony for a detailed discussion of each of the education-related bills before you today. I'll comment on two matters in my remarks that follow. First, I'd like to address the draft legislation that would permanently authorize protections for VA education benefits during emergencies. For years, student veterans have faced challenges with education benefits during times of unexpected hardships, often due to natural disasters. But the pandemic showed us just how many ways emergencies can negatively affect veterans' education benefits. We learned that monthly housing allowances, entitlement, VA work study, and more can all be adversely affected in these situations. Thanks to Congress's quick attention to these issues and swift action to pass emergency legislation, and of course later to expand those protections numerous times throughout the pandemic, student veterans were spared the brunt of the numerous nightmare scenarios they could have faced. In doing so, Congress created the robust but temporary safety net on which beneficiaries now rely. We all hope to put the pandemic behind us, but that does not mean we should ignore what it has taught us. Whether it be a natural disaster, which we know are likely to become more frequent and severe, civil unrest, or another health-related crisis, a future emergency is not a matter of if, it's simply a matter of when. Yet, thanks to our recent shared history and the template Congress established with the current temporary protections, we are better positioned than ever to protect student veterans and their VA education benefits in emergencies. We urge the members of this subcommittee to seize the moment and embrace the proactive solution of making the temporary protections a permanent authority. While VA supports this legislation, we encourage members of the subcommittee to consider other designations that may appropriately serve as the basis for activating these protections. The draft legislation's current language would allow these protections to be invoked when the President declares an emergency situation. There are several authorities that allow the President to declare emergency. But under the Stafford Act, an emergency declaration is just one of the declarations available to the President. For instance, a major disaster declaration can be issued for events such as a hurricane, tornado, storm, tsunami, earthquake, volcanic eruption, landslide, among other events. And student veterans have been affected by events like these in the past. Depending on the circumstances, they can more than fairly qualify as emergency situations. SVA understands there may be cost concerns with this proposal, and we stand ready to work with the subcommittee on this issue and others. Ultimately, however, the question that should guide the subcommittee's conversations on this issue is this: will Congress protect student veterans and their educational futures when they need it most? SVA thanks the subcommittee for considering this comprehensive draft legislation, and we strongly urge members to support it so that student veterans in their darkest hour can keep a roof over their heads and their seats in the classroom. I'd also like to comment briefly on a pair of program approval bills before the committee today. SVA supports the intent of both program approval bills, but it is clear to us that there is much work ahead to unify them into comprehensive legislation that can protect beneficiaries and taxpayer dollars without causing harmful unintended consequences to student veterans. Strengthening program approval has been a long-standing priority for SVA, and it's critical that the process guard against fraud, waste, abuse, and poor student outcomes. Equally important, however, is ensuring that these protections minimize unintended consequences to student veterans. SVA wishes to avoid creating unnecessary friction between other higher education laws and those that govern VA education benefits, such as those that were recently addressed in the Remote Act. SVA believes the Quality Education for Veterans Act would make common-sense fixes to the approval process to address numerous issues identified by the VA Office of Inspector General. We encourage Congress to include these measures, subject to any necessary refinement, in its eventual program approval legislation. The other untitled draft program approval bill includes additional requirements that would address predatory behavior and poor student outcomes. SVA supports the intent of this draft legislation, but we have concerns with the current legislation that fall into three general categories: definitions, scope, and workability. SVA hopes to work the subcommittee and other stakeholders through ongoing collaborative discussions to refine the current proposals to include, so they can be included in comprehensive program approval legislation. Thank you for your time, attention, and devotion to the cause of veterans in higher education. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hauschild. I now recognize Mr. Learman for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and members of the subcommittee. DAV is grateful for the opportunity to appear before you today, and my comments will focus on just a few pieces of the legislation on today's agenda. Mr. Chairman, DAV was founded on the principle that this nation's first duty to veterans is the welfare of its wartime disabled, especially homeless veterans and those at risk. We support the draft bill that would permanently authorize the use of funds to improve flexibility in the provision of assistance to homeless veterans. This would grant the VA Secretary permanent authority to use funds appropriated for the Grant and Per Diem program to provide homeless veterans and those in the programs with assistance such as food, shelter, clothing, blankets, hygiene items, as well as services such as transportation and technological devices. Additionally, DAV supports the proposed bill that would make improvements in the Supported Housing Program, or HUD-VASH. The need for these types of assistance for homeless veterans is clearly evident. We must continue the VA's initiative to eliminate homelessness among veterans and strengthen the capacity of the VA Homeless Veterans Program. Mr. Chairman, VA's Veteran Readiness and Employment Program, also known as VRNE or Chapter 31, plays a crucial role in providing vocational and education services for service-injured veterans and prepare them to obtain gainful employment that will not negatively impact their many conditions or disabilities. VRNE has provided hundreds of thousands of veterans with these life-altering services, and I have a personal experience with this. Almost 24 years ago, I myself successfully completed a plan and goal through VRNE. I then began my career with DAV as a benefits advocate, and I have assisted and represented thousands of veterans with their initial applications for VRNE, met with VRNE counselors, provided mentoring, and arguments for hearings and appeals in a lot of the denials to entitlement to the program. If not for VRNE, I would not be where I am today professionally or personally. These positive impacts and changes have benefited veterans and their families. Many would continue to be underemployed, unemployed, or suffering through financial hardships if not for the services and opportunities through VRNE. Therefore, DAV supports the draft bill that would expand VRNE's eligibility for veterans to receive self-employment assistance. As of July 2021, there were only 162 veterans in the self-employment track, while there were over 76,000 veterans in the long-term services track for employment. Removing the requirement that a veteran have the most severe service-connected disabilities whom require homebound training or self-employment will greatly open the eligibility and opportunities for veterans to participate in the self-employment track within VRNE. Veterans with service-related injuries deserve the opportunity for self-employment that accommodates their employment barriers and provides them and their families with financial empowerment. DAV remains committed to veteran training and employment, and since 2014, DAV has co-hosted nearly 800 traditional and virtual job fairs, connecting over 260,000 active duty, Guard and Reserve members, veterans and their spouses with employment, resulting in more than 159,000 job offers. Additionally, we are focused on veteran self-employment, which is evident by DAV's recent acquisition of Patriot Boot Camp. This program provides entrepreneurs in the veteran and military-connected community with the resources and education they need to be business founders and employers. Mr. Chairman, as the world continues to struggle through the pandemic and other economic challenges, we are still unsure of all of the potential long-lasting impacts for veterans and their families. DAV strongly supports the proposed legislation that would make permanent educational assistance benefits in the case of changes to course of education by reason of emergency situations. VA education programs provide valuable education benefits to millions of veterans. However, when national emergencies disrupt their enrollment, it can leave student veterans without a clear path forward. We must mitigate these financial burdens to veterans and their families. This concludes my testimony, and I look forward to any questions you and the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Learman. I now recognize Mr. Asante Mohammed for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And I thank Chairman Takano and the members of the subcommittee for providing me the opportunity to testify this morning regarding the proposed VA Home Loan Transparency and Consumer Protection Act of 2022. I am the Chief of Membership Policy and Equity at the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, NCRC. NCRC was formed in 1990 and has more than 600 grassroots member organizations where we focus on creating opportunities for people to build wealth. We work with community leaders, policymakers, and financial institutions to champion fairness and fight discrimination in banking, housing, and business. Since the end of the Second World War, loans guaranteed by the Veterans Administration have been a critical element in providing working-class households with affordable and safe financing for the purchase or refinance of a home. From passage of the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944 until 1955, the Veterans Administration provided backing for 4.3 million home loans, amounting to $347 billion in today's dollars. The post-war housing boom was largely possible due to no down payments, low interest, FHA, and VA financing. Between 1940 and 1960, there was an over 50% increase in both Black and white homeownership rates, though the disparity between the two groups was not closed. Returning Black servicemen contended with pervasive segregation and discrimination in lending. While the GI Bill itself did not mention race or segregation in its text, the manner in which the lending provisions were interpreted at the state and local level allowed wide latitude for discrimination. The Veterans Administration relied upon the underwriting manual currently in use by the Federal Housing Administration, which bolstered segregation by recommending that developments with racially restrictive covenants be favored in their underwriting decisions. The result? In Mississippi, in 1947, a survey by Ebony Magazine found that only 2 of the 3,229 loans made by the VA to farms, businesses, and for mortgages were made to Black former servicemen. The record of discrimination in lending was not much better in New York and northern New Jersey, where only 100 of 67,000 mortgages issued under the GI Bill were made to non-white servicemen. This created a situation in which white middle-class families purchasing homes in the suburbs received the vast majority of FHA and VA loans. Between 1946 and 1959, Blacks purchased less than 2% of all housing nationally financed through FHA and VA help. These practices were often allowed to continue until passage of the Fair Housing Act of 1968 that prohibited redlining and residential steering. Even after the passage of this legislation, a lack of targeted programs aimed at increasing Black homeownership has left Black-white homeownership at best stagnant and at times growing during the last 50 years. VA loans are crucial for maintaining the level of Black homeownership we see today. Black home buyers use government-insured mortgage programs like the VA for 58% of home purchases and 46% of refinances. This is substantially higher than every other major racial and ethnic group. Among those Black borrowers using government-insured lending, 28% of home buyers and 57% of refinance borrowers are using the VA home loan program to meet their needs. To increase beyond the low levels of Black home ownership, there needs to be both an expansion of government-backed financing in the home mortgage market and strong accountability for consumer protection and sustainable lending. Overall, just 1.8% of loans made by banks in 2018 through 2020 was a VA loan. Instead, VA lending is dominated by a relatively small group of non-bank lenders. Almost 15% of loans made by mortgage lenders are VA loans. These lightly regulated entities are not subject to the Community Reinvestment Act, CRA. As the report from Representative Porter's office reveals, loan churning in the VA loan program is a chronic issue among a small number of lenders. Loan churning occurs when a lender makes an initial loan, but at an artificially high interest rate, and then after a period of time, sells the homeowner a refinance loan to bring the rate down. This generates 2 sets of fees for the lender, saddling the borrower with years of additional interest payments. The limited market for obtaining these loans means that veterans and disproportionately Black veterans are more likely to become the victim of one of these lenders, or they instead are steered into a higher cost loan product. To support veterans and reduce the opportunity for predatory lenders in the VA loan program, NCRC supports the efforts of Representative Porter's office to enact the VA Home Loan Transparency and Consumer Protection Act. Using the non-public data reported under the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau can assess the prevalence of predatory practices such as loan churning in the VA loan program. I thank the committee again for providing me the opportunity to express thoughts of NCRC and our support for a VA Home Loan Transparency and Consumer Protection Act of 2022. I stand ready to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Asante Mohammed. With that, I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Mr. Learman, I wanted to thank you for your testimony regarding my discussion draft to expand access to the Veteran Readiness and Employment, or VR&E program, self-employment track. As I noted before, the self-employment track is underutilized and has extremely low enrollment. Can you please discuss the population of veterans that would be able to newly pursue self-employment under this bill?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. There are so many veterans that may have barriers that preclude them from attending college or institutions or even finding employment right away, whether it's severe health issues or mobility issues or even issues with technology to allow them to use things online. But they would have the ability to work at their own pace, their own speed, when they have the ability to run their own business. So this would benefit a very large population of veterans that I think are often underlooked when it comes to access for additional use for education or employment. It's really going to meet a group that I think has been greatly overlooked.
Thank you very much for that. The fiscal year 2019 NDAA required each military service secretary in consultation with the Secretaries of Labor and Veterans Affairs, to establish at least 3 pathways for their members receiving individualized TAP counseling. Transition counselors use factors outlined in the statute to screen service members for potential risk and assign them to one of the pathways based on the level of support that they need. Section 3 of the Veteran Health Transition Training Act would add factors like child care needs, spousal employment status, the location of their duty station, and the effects of their operating tempo. Mr. Learman, I appreciated your testimony regarding this draft bill. Could you please discuss how the new factors would allow counselors to better address the needs of transitioning service members?
Absolutely, and thank you again. So many veterans, when they're about to leave the military service, there are a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, and a lot of issues they have that they're just not aware of. For those of us who did transition, you listen, but you're not really paying attention because you have so many other requirements, responsibilities, family, jobs, children, that you're not always really giving your whole to that specific issue. What this would do is it would open it up, provide the counseling and opportunities for veterans to discharge to be better prepared, to make sure that they are in a place that they can tackle these right at separation instead of waiting maybe 2 years, like myself, to take care of even just the basic enrolling in VA, getting health care, using education benefits. So I think it's a great idea because it's going to meet a need right away and get them the access and understanding of those benefits right up front.
Terrific. Thank you for those comments. Mr. Hofstradt, I'll turn to you. I wanted to thank you for your support of permanently authorizing flexibilities for the use of education assistance benefits during emergency situations. The committee appreciated Veterans of America's support and partnership each time we had to reauthorize these flexibilities during the pandemic. We're also very hopeful that this legislation will provide the stable authorities that VA and student veterans need going forward should another emergency arise. And I think we all know, at some point in the future there will be another emergency. We have to be prepared. Could you please discuss why this legislation is needed? And when looking back at the process of passing the authorities that got GI Bill students through the pandemic, what lessons should we take from that?
Yes, sir, absolutely. So, when the pandemic kicked off in earnest in March of 2020, it became apparent pretty quickly that there were going to be issues with VA education benefits. And sometime after that, not became apparent that the issues weren't just focused on MHA. But to the credit of staff here and the members on this subcommittee and the broader committee and Congress as a whole, Congress was able to pass substantial protections and safeguards for student veterans that were impacted because of the pandemic. And these things made sure that they were going to continue to get their full monthly housing allowance if their courses shifted fully online, made sure they would continue to receive work-study payments, made sure that they were going to have entitlement protections, a whole host of protections. And, the process for getting to these protections was piecemeal. That was the nature of the pandemic. We were learning as the pandemic was unfolding. And then, of course, we had to extend these protections several times as the pandemic continued. Where we are now is that we have a roadmap for how to do this. We have a comprehensive idea for how we can protect veterans in the future. It's at our fingertips. And we know it's something VA can implement. We know it's workable. Institutions are familiar with it. It can be done. And from our perspective, it must be done because, like you said, Chairman, we know another emergency is going to happen in the future. It's just a matter of when.
Well, thank you so much for that. I'm out of time, but I just want to take a minute and just thank the staff again. During a moment of crisis at the beginning of the pandemic, we all worked together on a bipartisan basis and very quickly got student veterans the assistance that they needed. And I want to thank all of you for playing a role in all of that. And I think it's proof that we can get things done quickly and on a bipartisan basis around here. And hopefully we'll do that more. But with that, I'll recognize the ranking member for his questions.
Mr. Chairman, I echo your sentiment there. Being a rookie, it's good to see us work together rapidly sometime up here. It's not always the case. Speaking of Mr. Case, I want to, real quick, in my opening statement, I talked about how closely we worked with your office and trying to craft this legislation. And what are some ways that you think that this will help the Office of Inspector General catch some of the bad actors, kind of like Retail Ready. I think he defrauded nearly $70 million in taxpayer money. How do you see this bill helping that process and sort of shutting that sort of thing down?
Yes, sir, and we do appreciate the opportunity to inform you and the staff about our experiences. And based on our criminal investigations and audit work, the proposed legislation really serves to address gaps in the approval process. Just simply the act of requiring a uniform application will sharpen a tool that's available to SAAs, to Veterans Affairs, and to the OIG, and then you combine that with the disclosures that are going to be required, and there's really two benefits that result from that. One is a prevention benefit. It will help expose potential fraudsters just at the beginning of the process, and that will prevent potential losses to Veterans Affairs and to veterans. There's a second aspect which the bill addresses as the accountability aspect. And the accountability aspect means you catch people, the fraudsters, in mid-act, and in that regard, ultimately hold them accountable. And we believe in that sense the attestation requirement is a very important part of the bill. It really allows the government to show that there was a knowing violation here of law and regulation. So you combine those two, and it really assists VA, SAAs, and the OIG. And then on top of that, the section that shortens the notice for the surveys is important. We've found that between the date of the notice of a survey and the actual survey, fraudsters will coach teachers, students, and they'll manipulate and fraudulently manipulate their books and records. And by shortening that gap, that will really help catch people in midstream. And once again, protect veterans and protect Veterans Affairs. And finally, the requirement to check with the Department of Education, that's directed to the SAAs, will really help to leverage the resources of the federal government to provide information to prevent this fraud and, once again, protect veterans and Veterans Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Case. I appreciate it. Mr. Hochschild, I want to ask you a question real quick. What are some of the unintended consequences that you believe could occur if the draft program approval bill proposed by the chairman was enacted? What's some issues you see?
Yeah, thank you for the question, sir. And I want to make doubly clear that we support the intent of both bills, but like you mentioned, sir, we do have concerns about unintended consequences, and I think a large share of those concerns come from friction or potential friction points that might arise between other laws that govern higher education, the Higher Education Act, for instance, and the laws that we're discussing here governing VA education benefits. And to the extent that we have friction between standards that govern Title IV dollars and VA education benefits, that could be problematic for institutions in a way which is problematic for students, which is our concern, right? We don't represent the institutions, but we certainly represent the students. And so we think there are ways to refine the language to get at some of the underlying principles that are trying to be accomplished. And we stand ready to work with Congress on that. But, as a general matter, when we're talking about instructional spending, when we're talking about adverse actions, those types of things require extreme nuance, additional detail. But quite frankly, us working with a broad range of stakeholders to make sure that it's a workable piece of legislation, sir.
Thank you. And a follow-up on a different subject, and this is kind of in my wheelhouse, or at least it's something I'm passionate about. Do you believe that Congress should be encouraging the services to stop discharging service members who do not wish to get the COVID-19 vaccine with a general discharge?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, sir. I'll be fully transparent with you. We have not, at Student Veterans of America, heard from our chapter members or other veterans about this issue, but that's not to say it's not an issue. I respect the fact that you, sir, have heard from folks, even in your district, about this issue. And so we certainly recognize that it's an issue, and we appreciate the committee flagging it because I think it speaks to a larger issue that Student Veterans of America would like to have a conversation about when it comes to GI Bill eligibility and discharge status, and that's mental health. and how the discharge status, is related to mental health issues. Of course, there's been a lot of attention on the fact that the GI Bill is the only VA benefit that requires an honorable discharge in recent years, particularly as the conversation around mental health in the country has shifted. Student Veterans of America is interested in helping shift the narrative on mental health in this country when it comes to student veterans and service members, and we know there are many service members that received less than honorable discharges for behavior that was linked to underlying mental health conditions or behavior that was linked to underlying mental health conditions that was ultimately undiagnosed and untreated during their time in service. And so we appreciate you flagging this issue. I think we'd like to have a broader conversation about discharge eligibility and GI Bill status, and we look forward to working with this subcommittee and Congress on those issues and accomplishing that however appropriate.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I saved a minute and a half on the first round, but I went a little over this time, so we're back to even.
Appreciate the ranking member's questions. I'll recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Cawthorn.
Well, Chairman Levin, thank you very much. To my dear friend Ranking Member Moore, thank you very much for having this hearing. And to all our witnesses, thank you very much for your candor and for your testimony today. Mr. Hochschild, I know you just finished testifying, but I wanted to just go back to you. Could you please tell us more about your support for the Vets Credit Act and why its enactment will help ensure student veterans have access to benefits that have been restored following a school's closure?
Yes, sir, and thank you for the question. Thousands of student veterans have been impacted by precipitous school closures over the better part of the last decade. And for folks in those situations, they're struggling with a lot. They're struggling with an interruption to their academic studies, whether they're going to transfer at all to a new institution. We know when it comes to federal student loan borrowers, Government Accountability Report, I believe, put the number at about 43%, I believe, of folks don't complete the program at all or just drop out of higher education altogether. So, there's that part. And then there's the part of trying to get back and be made whole for their VA education benefits or, in some cases, federal student loans. And we know that veterans do take out federal student loans in addition to their VA education benefits. So it's a taxing time for folks, and we should be doing everything possible to make sure that these individuals have a clear understanding of the process to restore their VA education benefits at a time when they're dealing with a lot. And that's what we believe this bill does. This bill, from our perspective, makes clearer the process that a student needs to go through to make sure they get their benefits restored, particularly by making clear the consequences of the 12-credit threshold in the law, and gets them this information earlier in the process, which, again, at a time when you're dealing with so many things, can only be a benefit. So thank you, sir.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Learman, can you please tell us about why you believe we need expansion in the eligibility for the self-employment track and why the program is perhaps being so used inconsistently across the country?
Yes, thank you for the question. There are a large variety or a large group of veterans that have disabilities that preclude them from certain activities. To where we open up the self-employment track, now there's more options for them to be employed, even if it's self-employed, because then they can monitor their activities, the time they're able to dedicate to it, and be provided the resources and understanding of having that business all on their own and potentially become an entrepreneur. A lot of times they don't get that opportunity because for those of us when we transition, you basically have two, get a job or go to school. You don't always have that opportunity or be in a situation to where you can actually be self-employed that isn't going to interfere with your disabilities, your access to health care, or your benefits.
Well, Mr. Learman, thank you very much for that. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. We're waiting on a couple other members who said they're going to join the Zoom here momentarily, but in the meantime, I have just another question that I can ask. Mr. Berg, I wanted to thank you again for your verbal testimony, your written testimony, and in particular, your support of the discussion draft to permanently authorize the use of funds on basic needs for homeless veterans when they're at their most vulnerable. Currently, as you know, VA has the ability to flexibly use funds in this way under Isaacson Roe, but that authority expires at the end of the public health emergency. Could you please describe the gap that the lack of this authority left in the provision of services for homeless veterans prior to the pandemic and the passage of Isaacson Roe?
Sure. I think we tend to talk a lot about the solution to homelessness is housing, which it certainly is, and medical services. But there are a lot of other kinds of things that people who are trying to transition from living on the streets back to living in a house and trying to get a job and so that they can afford the rent and on an ongoing basis. A lot of these services, things like transportation. People don't necessarily have cars and they need to get back and forth to work if they're trying to do job. If they're entering some kind of training program, they need transportation back and forth to that. I think, people need furniture. They need dishes when they move into a house. These kinds of things, it's very helpful to have the VA be able to provide that, and we're concerned where that comes from if this is stopped.
In expanding on that, could you discuss a bit more how providing these essentials like food, shelter, transportation, furniture, how does that help veterans acquire and sustain permanent housing? How are they connected?
Well, I think they're connected in that it allows people to see a progression in their lives once they enter housing. I mean, the housing is good, but it's just by itself, it's just a set of walls. I think what we see and hear from people who have left homelessness sometimes after many years, is that to be able to take advantage of what that means, to be able to use that as a base to really solve other issues in their lives, they need different kinds of help. Among those, the kinds of supports that you were just referring to.
I was really impressed by the statistic that VA has been able to provide more than 38,000 rides to nearly 10,000 veterans using the flexibility that we provided. Could you discuss how the transportation issues that homeless veterans face and how this bill will make it easier for them to access the services and the care that they need in order to thrive?
Sure, and thank you again. I think the transportation issues are very important. I mean, I think homelessness among veterans occurs in all kinds of different, more rural settings, more urban settings. People need to get to work every day. They need help doing that. We just hear this over and over again, that the transportation issues are key, and there's nowhere else that's sort of a natural place to go to get those taken care of. So I think it's something that homeless veterans, I think, have been able to take advantage of, and has really helped a lot of people.
Well, I want to thank you again, all of you. It's an honor to work with you on this issue, and it's one that we're just going to continue to work at it. Obviously, we've made a great deal of progress in the past decade, but we still have a long way to go. And with that, I do see my friend and neighbor from Southern California, Representative Porter. Perfect timing, and I will turn to her for her 5 minutes of questions. Go right ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair Levin. Mr. Hosho, since 2014, veterans have been able to research and shop around for education programs using the VA's GI Bill comparison tool. Can you say a few words about why this tool was created and what it does to help veterans?
Yes, ma'am, and thank you for the question. The GI Bill comparison tool is designed to help student veterans, prospective student veterans, make informed choices about their higher education journeys. Making decisions about higher education can be extremely difficult. To compound the matter further, there are a lot of options to choose from. Choosing between those options comes with weighty consequences, some good and unfortunately some bad. So that's why it's so important that there's a tool to help these individuals make the best possible decisions they can about their academic futures.
And can you tell me a little bit more about how this tool actually works? What does it show you? Like, what are the search parameters? What kind of information do people get? And how have you been involved, if at all, in trying to make sure this tool works as well as it can?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. That's a great question. So the tool really includes a wealth of information. It includes everything from basic characteristics about institutions, including if they're accredited, where they're located, the program length, things of that nature. It also covers price and cost. It shows a veteran how far they're individual benefits will go to cover the cost of attendance at an institution. It also includes critical information like complaints against institutions and outlines the categories that those complaints fall into. So it really is a critical tool for veterans to better understand the outcomes of the decision they may make. And to the second part of your question, with regard to what Student Veterans of America has been doing to help improve the bill, we're continually working with VA to offer suggestions about what can be incorporated into the bill. And I will say, to VA's credit, they have continually made strides to improve the bill. In fact, recently they've added additional functionality that includes side-by-side comparisons and the ability to drill down geographically through map-type interfaces and things of that nature.
It's terrific. And I definitely, we know that people don't always shop. They're often not certain where to get that information. And I think it's really important to have the VA itself, the organization that, veterans most frequently interact with, be providing this. Is there any similar kind of comparison tool like that, or education tool, shopping tool for the VA home loan program?
Ma'am, I have to say I don't have the level of expertise, if I can even call it that, with VA home loans as I do education benefits. But I can say, not to my knowledge. I'm not aware of anything, at least within VA's apparatus, that serves that purpose.
Well, Mr. Harshaw, we weren't able to find one either within the VA. We weren't even able to find any kind of more traditional, sort of less interactive list about average loan costs or interest rates. And this is the sort of basic information that people need to shop for a loan. Do you think, based on the success of the GI Bill comparison tool for education, that might be a model for home loans?
Yes, ma'am. I think it has broad applicability and utility across government generally, but certainly within VA, and they've shown they've got they have the capability of executing on it and updating it as the landscape changes.
Well, the first step, and of course, in building any tool like that, is actually having the information that you would need about home loans to be able to study both problems, predatory practices, but also potentially, once you have that information as the VA, you can think about how to share it with homeowners. Mr. Asante Mohammed, the problems in the VA home loan program, predatory interest rates, deceptive marketing, we see these problems in other home loan programs as well, correct?
Correct. It's definitely not limited just to veteran borrowers, but we do see, because of the limited engagement in VA loans and giving out VA loans, that predatory issues are, even more highly exacerbated.
I wanted to ask you about the VA cash out loan program. Do you know, in 2018, the VA called predatory cash out VA loans subprime lending under a new name. And unfortunately, many of those same companies are still the industry leaders. Are mainstream big banks like Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Chase, are they making VA cash out loans?
We've done some review over, I guess, from 2018 to 2020, and what we're seeing is they do very small amounts of these cash out refinance loans.
And I think what that does is it leaves our veterans with organizations like New Day, which our report documented have very, very problematic practices. And so this bill would help us get the data to make sure that we're stopping those predatory lenders and doing the oversight of the VA loan program that veterans deserve. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
I thank my friend Representative Porter, and I believe with that there are no further questions, so we can bring this hearing to a close. I really want to thank our witnesses, both from the first panel and all of you, for joining us today. It's great to be back in this room and to see you all in person. I thank the ranking member as well for working in a collaborative manner. All members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include additional materials. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.